What's up, everybody? This is Rolling with Reason, episode 27. John is not with me for this episode, and it is because we have a blizzard going outside amongst me being so damn busy. But that doesn't mean that the show won't go on, so the show will go on, of course. And so, let's talk about what we're going to talk about, I suppose. This is kind of a hard thing to do, not doing many of these by myself. First of all, this whole setup looks crazy and weird and different. And then second of all, it's kind of just all the things that have been encompassing my life recently. And so we just have a bunch of books, and yeah, I like reading books and working on this stuff. So maybe we could just look at and talk about them a little bit. And so over here I have my programming books. So I'm currently working on this top one, which is like the Django framework, and then we have HTML, CSS, cybersecurity, Python crash course, and these other ones honestly I haven't even opened yet, but at some point I'm going to. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing outside of jujitsu or the podcasting. So, and then we also have a selection of books over here as well. Atomic Habits by James Clear, which you guys have heard me talk about a couple times on the podcast. We got the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, I believe is his name. And then we got the 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. The Art of War, Beyond Order. I actually haven't read these ones yet. I read a little bit of the Manifesto. I haven't read this one quite yet, and I'm working currently on Volume 1 of the Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And then we have volumes 2 and 3 up here. I've been reading this book right now a lot, pretty heavily, with the programming book, right? This is more of kind of like my philosophical / entertainment kind of book, even though it's not nonfiction, or it's nonfiction, it's not fiction. And but I usually program most of the day, and then jujitsu, of course. And so, but to touch on this real quick, it's an amazing book, an extraordinary book. It's given me a lot of different philosophical type oriented views towards work and life and things of that nature and stuff like that. And so it just really kind of broadens my horizon as far as my thoughts go, in conjunction with everyday aspects of life. And then over here is the programming stuff, which I just enjoy doing, right, passionately. I just so vigorously work towards these goals, at least associated with the whole website setup. So trying to build that from scratch, with a framework. Any of my developers out there or people that know how this works, and it's not technically from scratch, because the whole point of the framework is to build up the boilerplate code, so it's not as repetitive. But yeah, I guess to touch on this a little more, what I'm learning right now is like the user authentication and accounts system that's provided with the framework, which is one of the things that is super huge and nice about using a book like this, is that or not a book, but a framework like that, is that it kind of gives us some of the necessities that are included within it. And so that means that we can use those instead of setting up all of this stuff that would be otherwise redundant. And so it's awesome, because it means that we can build our applications that much quicker. Now, but there is kind of, I think, sort of a pitfall to going this route. And I think what that is that you spend the time learning, like if you want to dig and learn and understand the mechanisms of what's happening with these pre-provided snippets of code, then you'll dig far enough to understand them to a degree that you maybe could have built them by yourself. Now, there's probably a handful of people out there that don't go that deep into it. And there's also this kind of thought that keeps propagating through all different types of programming, content creation, and or books, and it's that you're not going to remember it all. And how I think that is true, I think trying your hardest to remember it all, in conjunction with, actually this part probably takes more precedence over the second, or over that part I just said, is trying to understand what's actually happening, right? Because if we actually understand what's happening, then there's this thing where you can kind of just read code to understand what it's doing before you necessarily try and remember what it's doing, right? And so what happens is, I think conceptually we get to these points within these programs, and then we just remember that we have to do some sort of task. And so, with that being said, as we remember what it is that we maybe should be doing or like putting in a spot, then we can read and kind of remember based off of great naming conventions that people have used, which comes from Python. And so I think that's a very interesting thing to think about, right? Because the framework is supposed to be this thing that kind of takes away all of the boilerplate code. But if you don't understand what the boilerplate code was doing in the first place, then it makes it way harder for, I think, the mental retention to understand what or why you're doing what you're doing. And so you have to learn that. And this book by William S. Vincent, Django for Beginners, is an excellent book at showing and teaching just that. Now, however, I will say I started with Python Crash Course by Eric Mathis when it came to learning Python. That's kind of how I started to learn Python. I'm always learning Python, though. I think anybody who picks up a programming language knows exactly what I mean by that when I say it. And if you don't, it's just there's so much to learn. There's so much to do just within the base of the actual programming language itself, let alone the actual programs or packages that you can use in association with the programming language. And so that was the first book I used to start doing it, start doing the Python stuff, start teaching myself. And then I quickly realized that I need to know more Python. But towards the end of the Python Crash Course book, he started going through his project where he uses function-based views, function-based views, and those are nice because they actually don't use what I would consider more of the function-based views are something that you kind of actually build what feels like from scratch, especially conceptually. It helps you understand the inner workings of it. But if we was to use something like generic class-based views, now we're using more of the stuff that's divided by the Django, which abstracts away a lot of the boilerplate code. But you have to understand what it's doing internally, because otherwise then it's just one of those things where you're just kind of trying to remember stuff and you don't know why you're doing stuff. And so it's very important, I think, to take the time to dig into those things. Another thing that I think is exceptionally important is probably the documentation, and that's because William gives references to all of the things that we're going over within the book as we progress through the book. And I think if you took the time to look at those references and also try and understand what's going on with what you're working on in the book, it would actually make it way more conducive to learning. Now, I will say though, since I started with Python Crash Course, I kind of do that a little less, but that's because I took so much time in Python Crash Course that I kind of understand the inner workings to a degree that I can read some of the Python code that's provided by the Django and decipher some stuff. And then if not, of course, I'm using AI tools to help me learn in a degree that's not maybe traditional. I think maybe a lot of people use AI in a way that is different from how I use mine. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just like using it as a tool to learn. And that one in particular is Perplexity. And that's because I heard about it numerous times and actually heard, I believe, the CEO of Perplexity talk on Lex Friedman's podcast. And it's an amazing research tool and gives you very good sources. And so I'm pretty happy with the way that it helps me learn and dig in and stuff. But I think there's an art form to that too, right? I think there's a way to learn with these tools versus crutch off of the tools, and really testing and pushing your memory limits is going to be where you find what is the best or works the best for you. But to kind of get outside of that for a moment, I think something to kind of touch back on was the Gulag book. It's been making me evaluate circumstances within work to a degree that I really enjoy. And what I mean by that is there's kind of a line where it talks about people who are being interrogated. The ones that are the hardest to be interrogated are the ones that know, I suppose they have a sense of humiliation. They don't know everything. And that there is a greater complex and abstract thing other than themselves. So when I say that, I kind of mean this to the extent that they have the humiliation to admit that they don't know everything, instead of trying to move through life wielding this kind of quote-unquote power, and that being the absolute thing. And so that can make people feel limitless. And I think there's a lot of positions within a multitude of work environments that kind of facilitate this mindset. The mindset is understandable to a degree, but I think the kind of embodiment that companies have in relation to that environment could have been changed. They could have done maybe some different things, and I don't say that to the degree that I think what they're doing is wrong. I'm just saying I think they could have done it better, and I think that's the difference between, maybe these companies that withstand the tale of time where others fault. And so I think a good way for me to think about this, and one of the awesome things that I think is happening with me all the time now, is I just feel like my life and stuff is just intersecting in ways I didn't anticipate. And so I've been listening to this podcast called Founders, and it's a shame on me for not knowing the gentleman's name that's been putting that on, but he's been doing an exceptional job at reading these, I believe, biographies of these people who are extremely successful. So we're talking like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Jensen, which is the guy from NVIDIA. I can't remember his last name. I probably should, but I'm so just invested in what I'm doing. And then who else? Let's see. Elon Musk was on there, of course. And then I believe another guy named Devin, which is the lead guy from Spotify. And so the guy from Spotify was kind of the eye-opener for how I started thinking about and how I started incorporating the thoughts associated with the Gulag and then companies and this kind of intermix in between of where maybe they could have done something different. Maybe they could have created something more robust. And I know that's a very broad statement, but I suppose it's one that shouldn't be left out, even though it's broad. But I think nonetheless, I think as long as society orients themselves in a way to where we keep pushing forward for working independently hard, but being loving and kind to one another, then it's all going to work out. It's all going to be okay. And if not, I'm still going to work really hard and be nice to people. And, I think I think I'm okay with that. I think if I ponder on the question of death, but I knew that I oriented myself in that way, I think I know that that's going to be fine, and it's going to be okay. But to push forward with the podcast and not get caught up on too many individual subjects, I have been feeling like changing careers a lot lately. And I suppose it's kind of within the same ballpark of what we were just talking about. The environment isn't as robust. Is it the environment, though? I kind of disagree. I think the environment can be fine. I think what the thing is being around people who are creative or want to be creative or energetic or ready to create something, or they're excited to create something, can make all the difference. There's kind of a saying within where I work that kind of holds true, and it's that the people you work with can make or break the job. And so I think maybe that isn't just tied to my job. Maybe that's every job. That probably is every job, right? And so when I think about a saying like that, or I'm thinking in a way that aligns with that, I think it's true, because you could be doing, I believe, the worst job, but if you're surrounded by good people, it won't be so bad. Now, of course, there's limitations to that too. And then if we look at, you could have, quote unquote, the best job on earth, whatever that be, which is highly an individual opinion, but you could be surrounded by people who are miserable, and so then the job isn't as good. And so I think that's where this interesting social networking slash integration with your life and what you're doing and wanting to do it and being creative kind of comes hand in hand. And something that makes me think of almost hand in hand is the amount of hours that we work at work. I think in my case, I've been working overtime for a really long time. And it's kind of crazy to think that it's really. So let's touch back on the power thing for a moment. I think sometimes individuals can get into positions where they don't realize how hard maybe work is being produced underneath of them when they're only fixated on the potential gain for power and authority within that company. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily that's a bad thing. I think to some degree you need that, but I think they forget sometimes that I've been working anyways, 50-hour, 60-hour weeks for, I honestly don't know how long. Now, there's been stretches where I don't, right, or I get a couple weeks off or whatever, but that's not as consistent as maybe some other employment places, and I suppose that's just the way that construction is, right? If the work's good, you take advantage of the work, and if it's not, then you should be thankful for every hour you get. And that kind of aligns, that thought pattern or process or just thought in general. It makes sense, but I think to a degree. And what I'm going to say, though, is that even though I think that, like, 40 hours a week sounds great, but it only sounds great in the context of a job that I view as almost suffering, if not suffering, because of the environment and the way that it's not as positive or creative or inspiring as it could be. And I think there's maybe a small note or something I should inject here that doesn't make this single-sided, is that constructive criticism in it of itself could be something that is extremely powerful for the creative process or even the relationship between you and somebody else. And I think there's a very specific way that you can go about doing that, but I still think that needs to be facilitated within the environment that is creative and inspirational and hardworking. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows, but there's something to that. But to come back to what we were saying, I do think that you will naturally work more hours within a week if it's something that you do actually enjoy and want to do. And I don't even think you'll do it in a manner that is because you are being told to do it. I think it just comes from the manner of wanting to be good at whatever it is that you're doing, and then just being interested in it in a way that's almost self-building, I suppose, is a word, or a couple words that would kind of encapsulate my thought there, is that if you're highly interested in something to the degree that you spend time to learn about it on your own time, if you make money at performing that thing and then also reading and taking the time to get better at the thing, then you will only naturally get better at that thing. And I think you will only naturally devote more of your time to that thing. And so I think that's where the concept of being spread out too much is definitely a thing. And I think, you gotta make sure that you're not spreading yourself out with too many hobbies or too many things that isn't aligning with what it is that you actually like to do. And what you actually like to do clearly is an individually based thing, but this is to come back to the whole 40 hours a week thing. I think if you're actually doing something you like to do, you'll naturally work more than 40 hours. But I think if you're doing something that you don't like doing, then I definitely think that the 40 hours a week is definitely a specific problem that should be looked into, right? Working a bunch of overtime is not a bad thing if they offer it, but the problem more importantly comes in when people almost demand the overtime of you, and if you don't, then they will find somebody who will work it for you. And so that's interesting, right? Because if we keep doing that to the nth degree, then it means that we'll just be populated with a bunch of people that wants to work overtime, and then they don't get the time to do the things that they enjoy. Unless it's actually something that they enjoy, then I would say get that guy in there, but it seems like in the environments that I've been in, it's not so much as the case that everybody wants to work the overtime because they enjoy what they're doing. They only work the overtime because it's plausible at this very particular moment. And so what they do with that, instead of keeping up with their financials, is they neglect the impact of working that overtime has on their financials. And then they spend the money to a degree to where they would have been fine just working 40 hours, but devoting more time to the things that they actually like. So that's a very interesting conversation and a topic to have, maybe with yourself progressing through work and the amount of hours you work and what your schedule and stuff looks like. And this is even coming from somebody who doesn't have kids, and I think that's a big factor to take into consideration when you talk about these things. I think even if I had kids, I would probably even work more, like less. Sorry, I'd work less hours to spend more time with my kids. So it's a very interesting, I think, problematic state that's within the U.S. and oddly enough, it ties back into the American dollar. But I think capitalism works, but for reasons stated before about creative, inspirational environments, if you surround yourself with people that want to be in those environments, and it actually happens to be something that you want to do, which is often probably where you're going to find the creative inspiration people to do that thing, then, I think you're going to be extremely successful, and I think capitalism kind of encapsulates that to some degree. And so I guess I don't know why I'm bringing that up or why I'm saying that. I suppose it's just because of the monetary, financial aspect of working the hours in association with something. But I suppose other than all of that, let's start to dive into jiu-jitsu, because I have been learning some Octopus 2.0 guard from Craig Jones. So that's been really fun and really cool. Now, I've picked up little things about the Octopus Guard from his first video series that he put out, and but it wasn't because I watched that video series. It was just through the grapevine and association with people that were watching it. And so then when 2.0 came out, I thought to myself, well, I've kind of already been doing the inner workings of what that is, so I think it would be really cool if I started to learn the 2.0 series. And so that's kind of what we've been looking at and working on. I find it extremely... It actually lines up with kind of how I've been playing my game inside the gym. So it feels like inside of the gym, I'm more of a defensive player, and I try and let people put me in horrible situations. And so I try and stay out of those situations so that may the worst possible outcome come during a competition, I'm able to handle that efficiently. But in the case of the actual competition in and of itself, I'll try and be super aggressive. Not try and be, I'll be super aggressive, and I'll want to attack and go for the submissions to finish the match off as quickly as possible. And I think that's the most efficient, logical way to try and orient yourself in jiu-jitsu. A lot of people don't do that, and I disagree, but it's fine. With that being said, though, the Octopus Guard is really kind of as your game's almost in a way submissive to try and get a sweep or to try and get a reversal. And so it's kind of interesting because most people will fight for that side control position, and so I suppose you could try and wear them down by making them fight through your guard, and then once they get to a certain point, you can just let them pass, because now you're working on this reversal sweep mechanism from side control, which is a position that most people aren't expecting. Now, I will say, however, it's a little harder to use in the gi, but seeing as how Craig is a no-gi oriented guy, and seeing as how the whole instructional is done, I believe, in no-gi, it makes sense that it's not as dominant in the gi, right? The grips that you can get, it makes it hard to, the grips your opponent can get, it makes it hard for us to be able to stay in a position or get out of the position, just because there's different, I guess, I suppose, physic fulcrum points that kind of tie our body down in a different way from the no-gi aspect. But this being the first instructional I ever watched of Craig, I really liked it. I guess I'm not completely done with it. You know, I'm like I'd say more than halfway through it. And he's got a funny way of kind of expressing and talking about these positions and these moves in conjunction with the video. And it makes it entertaining to watch. So not only do I think the moves actually work, and he also provides snippets of video where he's using these moves, which I thought was cool. You know, not everybody does that, but he was also funny. The names are funny. The naming conventions are funny. And I even think I heard him say something about the way that you name instructionals. You know, you just name it after an animal or something along those lines, and it'll sell. Now, I don't know how true that is, but I do think Craig's a funny guy, and so it made it funny to. It made it more fun to watch. But yeah, I would say I'm working on that a lot right now, and I'm thinking about, in February, I'm going to start traveling for jiu-jitsu tournaments and start putting out more content on the Grid Grappler channel. We haven't done that a lot in January, but imagine this, it's because of work. Work has been bogging me down. And so, yeah, here coming February, I think we're going to sign up for a couple of IBJJF competitions, and we're going to record those, and we're going to put that out on the Grid Grappler channel. So I'm super excited about that, and I'm genuinely enjoying the editing process and really just working with footage and the way that we can color grade and the different things that we can do, and even so much so that there's a couple guys that I knew that wanted to do podcasting, and so I was helping them as well, you know, kind of saying like, hey, like, you know, we've done this for, I don't know, 25, 26 weeks or something, so I'm sure there's a couple things I know that maybe I could help you guys with. And so I was kind of directing them and giving them an idea, and so I thought that was really fun too. And I think that's just another key indicator that I really like the whole podcasting, video editing sort of atmosphere thing that's going on here. And even in this case, right, like I'm just sitting here, I guess, talking to the camera by myself, with myself, thinking about philosophical thoughts and societal constructs and programs that have patterns and jiu-jitsu, because all that stuff in some way I think is highly interchangeable and intertwined, and they're symbiotic in some way. Maybe that's not the right choice of word. Right chosen word, the right word for what I just said, symbiotic, but it doesn't matter. Listen, what I'm saying is I enjoy doing this stuff, and I'm having a lot of fun doing it, and I hope that for anybody that watches this, I hope you guys enjoy it just as much as I did, because this is cool. This is cool, getting to share my thoughts and express myself in a way with you guys that I don't get to do with most people. Maybe that's out of self-decision making to not do that with other people as often. But maybe it's also just because I'm so busy and enjoying what I'm working on, right? And so being able to do this, even though it was by myself and John wasn't here, you know, I'm having a blast. This was a lot of fun. And for anybody that tuned in and listened to it or watched it, you know, thank you for watching. If you have any feedback, give me some feedback. Tell me what I can do different with the lighting, with the setup, just the whole thing. Just give me some feedback. And if there's anything that you have questions about or an association with the stuff that we were talking about, feel free to drop it in the comments. That's why they're there. Talk to me. I want to talk to you guys. It's a lot easier for me to talk to you guys that way. So, but yeah, this was Rolling with Reason, episode 27. Thank you for tuning in if you watched, and peace.